calm down. Mama, I'm fine, don't worry. Go back out to sea, sail home, sweet home, where the ships must go to get all cleaned up and put away.
Hi, hello everybody. Happy Friday. It's good to be with you all. I am Dakota as usual, and today, because we're going to talk about Regional Center, I am joined by...
I'm Vanea, and I'm the Regional Center Advocate at Galt Advocacy.
And we are so glad to have you. And we've actually kind of teased this for a few weeks. We've said, oh, if you've got Regional Center questions, you know, we've had our Q&As and whatnot. And me and Caleb were like, well, we kind of know the answer, but really you want to come back when Vanea is here because she has all of the answers for everything having to do with Regional Center. Isn't that right?
I don't know about all of them.
Well, I mean, as we were talking about, you are learning new things every once in a while because there's a lot to go over. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you typically do, you know, here at Galt Advocacy, just like what you do here?
Absolutely. So my job has a couple parts here. I do Regional Center. I also work in special education. But with Regional Center, I do consultations with families, assist them with either eligibility, appeals process. I can do informal hearings and mediation, not fair hearings. So I can help families either prepare or attend to those with them. I review IPPs from the Regional Center, especially for our IHSS department, in order to kind of look at if they cover everything thoroughly, go over all of the areas of need, things such as that, so that you have a well-written document, because that document with the Regional Center isn't just a piece of paper, it's what's used to determine what supports are needed, and therefore services run off of that.
Yeah.
So it's an important piece of paper.
It is. How many years of experience do you have with Regional Center related work?
With Regional Center related work, you're going to make me count here. I have 14 years if you add it all together. I worked at the Regional Center for 9 years. And then I've been at Galt Advocacy doing advocacy for Regional Center for the last 5
years.
My degree is in special education. So, you know, prior to that, my world was education, but for the last 14, the Regional Center.
All right. So she knows what she's talking about. So today we're going to be talking all about Regional Center. So if you have any questions, go ahead and throw them down in the comment section. Heidi Castaneda says big cheers for three cheers for Vanea. Absolutely.
Hi, Heidi.
All right. So as we're getting comments and people are going to put their questions in there, do you want to talk a little bit about what's different? What are some recent changes or what's new at the Regional Center like right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's we recently did, I believe we considered a blog post regarding Regional Center and DDS rules regarding sharing. So there was 2 pieces. One was data sharing, so Regional Center's access to, for example, IHSS records. And then the other piece was just kind of a crackdown on payer of last resort rules. When it comes to the data sharing, there was concerns about it as far as how much access Regional Center has to your private records. I did some research into that, and DDS, their data sharing that has just come about, you have to sign a release. So the gist of it is Regional Center said we need information on IHSS and these various services that an individual has when you request certain types of services. So if you're requesting something like personal assistance, they need to know, what do you already have? Since our whole system is set up looking at Regional Center being the payer of last resort. And so one of the ways to do that is them saying, well, personal assistance is similar to what you would get from IHSS. We can't double dip in that system. You can't have 2 services at the same time. So we need to know what you already have and what hours in a day you don't have support for. And then you can look at what Regional Center can fund for. So when they request documents from you, and now they can have you sign a release, and instead of you needing to provide them those documents, they can just get them directly. From my understanding, at least how it's written as of now, you are required to sign a release to give them the okay. So they don't automatically get access into that system until you give them permission.
So the IHSS isn't going to just start sharing information unless you give Regional Center permission to request that information.
So it will be similar to right now when you have your meetings. Most service coordinators annually have you sign forms for the doctor, for example. They, in all honesty, rarely request your medical records for your child. It's there in case you request a service or support and they need some supporting documents from the doctor. But nonetheless, they provide that to you at almost every meeting and ask you if you'll sign permission for them to contact your doctor if needed. It should be similar. I say should because we have 21 regional centers, and while they have general oversight from the state, they all implement things a little bit different. So I can't tell you what all 21 are doing. But they should be providing you basically a release at your annual meeting every year for the same thing, to have access to your IHSS records, and you get to choose to say yes or not.
Okay. And what was the other, the crackdown you mentioned about payer of last resort?
Last resort. So there was some information out there about DDS trying to implement stricter payer of last resort criteria. I would say this is not something that is new. So as much as maybe there's a little bit more conversation around it, I didn't find anything that hasn't already been in place. So it's making sure that everyone's following payer of last resort and is doing due diligence between all 21 regional centers. But payer of last resort's always been in place. And to be honest, most government systems claim that they're the payer of last resort, which is where it gets tricky. But payer of last resort means that the regional center can't fund for something until you access it through another service, if another service provides it. So that would be, for example, the school system. If you're asking for a therapy that insurance could pay for, you would have to go through insurance first. If you have a child, let's say you have a child that's eligible for regional center with cerebral palsy and you need equipment, you would have to go through CCS. If you have CCS, California Children's Services, if they can provide equipment, and you have to go through medical insurance. If you have those denials, then you can give them to regional center and you can ask them to fund for them. But you have to try the other entities that could potentially provide that first. And so the same is going when it comes to things like personal assistance. If you're asking for personal assistance through the regional center to provide that, a caregiver for whichever purpose, depending on age, if it's going into the community or things like that, you would have to provide information on IHSS, since IHSS is in essence personal assistance. They do a similar thing.
Now, I know a question we get a lot, especially now that they're doing the data sharing thing with IHSS, is that does IHSS affect respite? We get that question quite a lot.
Yes and no. So no, not technically. However, they do have to look at how many hours you have left in a day that are not getting a service funded. So respite hours and IHSS, that conversation can happen a bit more when you have a child that has a high amount of supports already. So if you have a child that has school, so they're gone, let's say from 8 to 3 o'clock every day.
Right.
And then they have an ABA provider, and the ABA provider is there from 3 o'clock until 6 o'clock every day. And then they have, social recreational activities on the weekends. Then they're going to look at, well, when would you use your respite?
You get 9 or 10 hours of IHSS on top of that.
Yep. And so then you add your IHSS in and whatnot. So what they'll make you do in that case is fill out a calendar. I tell families, or I'll send them even just a blank calendar, a 24-hour-a-day calendar for a 7-day period of time. So, a Sunday through Saturday calendar that has every single slot from midnight, on. for every day, and you're just marking off school 8 to 3, IHSS, where you use that, ABA, where you use it, and then where you have blank spots on your calendar, you could ask for respite to add up to what that comes out to. But you have to have time available where there's not a funded service. And you have to remember, Medi-Cal is funded by our state. School system is funded by our state. IHSS is funded by our state. Regional center is funded by our state. So all of these are coming from California state funds, and they want to make sure that the resources are being used appropriately and that nobody's abusing those systems by using, like I said, 2 at the same time.
Okay. All right. So what you were saying is that, like, so with the whole pay or last resort thing, regional center, you have to first try and get the service from other available service providers. And if they can't do it, or if whatever they provide isn't sufficient, then is when a regional center.
Correct. And you have to provide documentation. So if it's equipment, you have to provide a denial from insurance. If it's personal assistance, you need to provide them a copy of your IHSS hours. And then, like I said, they can require you to fill out a calendar to show how you're using those. It gets funny because people say, well, IHSS doesn't ask me what hours of the day I'm using those. You don't fill out a time card that says I used them from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. So you put in a general amount, but you're not putting the exact hours of the day. So you're just estimating when you would be using those. If you're up all night long because an individual wakes up for several hours and they try to elope out the door when they do, and therefore you can't sleep, then your IHSS hours could be blocked off for the middle of the night for some of those hours. So it's, it really varies from person to person. But the last thing on that topic, and it's not really pay or last resort, but because we talked about respite's intent is different than personal assistance. So personal assistance and IHSS can really be compared very similarly. Personal assistance, or IHSS, and respite, though, are different. Personal assistance and IHSS provide a service for the consumer or the client. They provide support in some fashion. Respite service is supposed to provide a break for the caregiver. So the intent of respite is for the caregiver. And it gives them a break because the care of the individual is significantly higher due to their developmental disability than someone else at the same age. So with a young child, their care, a young child still needs care regardless of disability. If you have a 3-year-old, they're still going to need a parent to make their meals. They're still going to be probably in the middle of toilet training or not quite there yet. They're still going to need help with brushing their teeth. So some of those things are required just because they're 3. However, most 3-year-olds that have intellectual disability or autism, have epilepsy, those things, their needs they have the regular needs of a 3-year-old, and then they're amplified due to their disability, and their needs are even higher than that. When you have a 20-year-old and you still have to provide supervision and you can't leave them home alone to even go to the grocery store, then your 20-year-old has a very clear difference between someone who is, a typically developing 20-year-old and then someone who has a developmental disability at 20 years old. But they're always comparing to that. So when you're looking at the need for personal assistance or the need for respite, you're always looking at what is the difference between this individual and someone else at the same age, and how do I relate this back to their developmental disability. For services in general, with respite, you need a break because of the disability. How much of a break you might need, though, might depend on how high of need your individual has. So that would be kind of your argument, is always going back to what's related to the disability and how substantial is that, and how do I talk about that?
Okay. And like you said, since respite and IHSS kind of have different purposes, is why they don't really, under most circumstances, they don't take away hours from each other, because they have different purposes, unless you're completely filling up your schedule, in which case there's no time for the respite. Yeah.
Correct. So you can't have a regional center say that you have IHSS, therefore you can't have respite. Absolutely not. And I have heard some people say that they've been told something similar or it reduces. It only can reduce it if you've ran out of hours available in the day because your child has so many services already.
Yeah, which most probably aren't going to be in that
Most
situation.
of the time, not.
All right, we had a whole bunch of questions, so let's jump into some of these. All right, Terry said, I think what is tough as a parent, especially as a child, when you are meeting with your rep every once in a while, they will share a benefit. Example, I'll be told, hey, if you want to have your child participate in the jump air trampoline park, but if that wouldn't have been mentioned, I would not know about the benefit. How can we be sure we even know what benefits are available or examples of what could be a benefit? So yeah, what's a good way to find out about things if you're not being, directly told by your caseworker?
I mean, I'll make a couple notes here as far as things for us to post after this. There are some resources on the DDS website regarding kind of a list of all the services that could be available.
Mm-hmm.
There's one that does a decent job breaking down a child service versus an adult service versus early intervention. So only for children under 3. However, it's not entirely accurate because you can't specify everything by a checkbox. So yes, that box is checked. However, you have to meet about 8 criteria before you actually get to use a service in that category. So I hesitate on that, but at least you know where to start from.
You can actually ask about those things. Yeah.
So your example of the trampoline park, that would be under a social recreational service. And social recreational services, there's a lot of options, and it doesn't have to be something specifically for individuals with developmental disabilities. Social recreational services came back into place a few years ago. Those services were frozen when our budget got tight for many, many years and just became unfrozen. So it's not new per se. It's been there, but we didn't have the ability to use it. And now we're back to being able to use those services. So those can include lessons, a karate class, swim lessons, any kind of social activity, a class that your child wants to take, because they are under a regulation that goes over that social piece. The idea is to increase socialization in the community. With the exception of swim lessons, they pretty much have to be with at least one other individual, so one other child, because you are learning a skill, socializing in the community, and creating those social skills while doing it. And you have to have another child to socialize with for it to be a socialization program. Swim lessons are the exception to that.
Because the safety involved.
Well, 2 things. Because it can be dangerous for some children to learn how to swim with a group. So some kids can do that, some kids can't. If due to your child's developmental disability, they have a difficult time doing groups or it wouldn't be safe, they consider swim lessons to still be a social recreational service because you're creating the opportunity for social experiences in the future. So many social activities have to do with a swimming pool, a beach, a lake, things that include bodies of water. And in order for your child to have the opportunity to do those activities and to socialize in the community in that way, they have to be safe in water first. And if they can't learn to be safe in water in a group, then that's kind of the workaround on a swim lesson in particular. But you can use it for all sorts of things. You can look at equine therapy, horse riding lessons, as long as it's with another child. So there's all sorts of opportunities. Those are not, some regional centers might have a list of a starting point, but in social recreational activities, that's one of the only services that's set up with a parent becoming a vendor to be reimbursed for a service. So you actually don't have to have a service that is on a regional center list, as long as it meets the criteria of being a social service in the community. You could get it covered under there and you get reimbursed, but you get to pick your own. So with most things with regional center, you have to use agencies that they already have vendored. With social recreational, it's a little bit more of, you get to explore what's available in your particular community, and you get to ask for specifically what it is you're looking for your child or what your child's interest is. So it gives you more options.
All right. Let's see. Teresa put in a question that she'd gotten probably on Facebook before. I think we kind of covered this one already, but we can go over these. It says, we've had someone say the regional center told them they needed to apply for IHSS protective supervision before coming to them for respite. Is that correct? Does regional center require you to apply to other programs and get denied?
And I think when I said respite, I think it was maybe personal assistant that they were asking. If that
Perhaps.
Personal assistance, yes. They would.
Even if you don't have any IHSS at all, they still require you to apply
It's a
for
generic
IHSS?
service in the community. So they're payer of last resort. So if there's a service available that you have the option to try to get, you have to try to get it first.
Mm-hmm.
You can't choose not to use it. So for example, somebody might choose to homeschool. You can't ask the regional center to fund for services during the school day because you chose to homeschool. You have the legal right to do that. However, regional center says if you want somebody to provide you support during those hours, you have the option to use the school system. You're choosing not to, but you have the option to. So therefore, it's the school's responsibility for those hours, or it's your responsibility if you opt out of something that is available to you. IHSS is going to be the same way. If you have a potential of having access to personal assistance through IHSS, they're going to see them similarly, then you have to try to get that first before. Sometimes if there is, for some reason, a sudden, dire, urgent need, regional center will provide personal assistance, but on a short-term basis. So if the expectation is your IHSS application typically takes 3 months to go through, then they would provide you a 3-month authorization for a certain number of hours. And then you have to renew it if your IHSS maybe isn't actually all the way through at that point.
Or if you get denied.
But then they're looking at information as well from your IHSS denial. I had a conversation this morning with the family about this of if you have a note from somebody that says your child needs a 2-to-1 ratio at all times, but everybody else is telling you your child's fine in a group class, for example, or has been able to do other activities without even technically a 1-to-1 ratio, then that might get tricky. So in those cases where maybe at school they're able to go into a group environment, IHSS is saying you don't actually qualify for protective supervision because you don't have a high enough need. Then regional center may question, is there really a need for all of these hours? So it can get tricky. You absolutely can still get personal assistance if you're denied IHSS, but it might be a little bit more of a battle, and how many hours would be up to discussion, because if the other documentation is saying there isn't a need, just because you say one, there's a conflict here.
I see. All right. Marie had, I think, a question. I think it's in multiple parts, so I'll try and get all of these. My daughter's pediatrician referred us to Alta Regional Center, and I thought it was for an autism diagnosis, but I later received a letter she qualifies for services. I asked if that meant she's autistic. Her worker said yes. Now, over 2 years later, after starting this journey, I'm learning they don't diagnose. And if I want an actual diagnosis, I need to get a referral for my institute. Now that I'm attempting to get SSI and IHSS, am I going to need that actual diagnosis?
So regional centers don't diagnose or make someone eligible for regional center unless your child's under 3. I don't know how old your child is. This is why I'm hesitating. So I'll backtrack. If your child is an early intervention, so if they're under 3 years old, a child doesn't require a diagnosis. They're based on risk factor. So at that point, you're looking at, does the individual have a delay in an area which makes them of higher risk to have a developmental disability? They'll provide services then based on risk, because there's a lot of research that says if you give a huge amount of services to children under 3 when their brains are the most moldable, that some of them may not need those services later in life. And so our federal government requires every state to have an early intervention type system in place in order to provide services really early on to prevent the need across the board for everyone later. so in that case, regional center wouldn't have a diagnosis. Sometimes in the 3 to 5 range, you have something called provisional eligibility, where they're not fully qualified, they're only partially, and they can then go off of a couple areas of substantial disability, and they're still working on it. Those are for kids that they're not positive if they have a developmental disability yet. And they're maybe waiting for them to start in the school system to get a little bit more information on how they're doing in day-to-day life. That ends though at age 5. So any possibility of the regional center doing anything without an actual diagnosis would be at the latest your child could be is the day before their 5th birthday.
So she clarified that she's 6 years old.
Okay. So at 6 years old, they would have had to have done an assessment of some sort, or occasionally they can use an assessment that you already had done. But if you didn't have an autism diagnosis from a private provider, they would have had your child meet with a psychologist in order to make them eligible under autism. So I've never heard of a workaround around that or seen one. So I'm wondering if maybe there was an assessment done
at some point in the past they did get a diagnosis.
Correct, because they don't do a diagnosis for autism off of just a review of records if your records don't include an autism evaluation in there somewhere.
Is that something the pediatrician can do?
No. So there has to be, and regional centers are pretty strict on that. Even if you have a private insurance funded autism evaluation, 9 or 9.5 times out of 10, they're still going to require to do their own. And it is an actual diagnosis. It's done by, a licensed professional who does diagnose. Schools are not. So that is different. If you had a school diagnosis of autism, that is just based off of a risk factor. And they say you're functioning similar to someone with autism in the school system. So that would not be a diagnosis that you carry on, but regional center does do an actual full evaluation.
Okay. All right, let's get to some of these other ones. I mean, we still got quite a few comments to get through. I'll try to go quickly. Francisco said, how can a signed provider work with a Medicaid recipient? Is it possible, or how it works? Can you please help me to enroll this Medicare recipient into IHSS?
That would be a
IHSS question. I'm not sure I understand the... I'll just try to answer it as basically as possible. It sounds like what you're saying is, how does a provider get attached to a IHSS?
I think it's meaning medical.
Right, but you don't...
Or Medicaid, which is the federal government system.
Medicaid, Medi-Cal, IHSS all kind of is blurring together. I mean, I don't think... Because like a provider for IHSS and a provider for Medi-Cal would be two very different things.
Well,
like
Medicare for elderly.
Right, but like those providers would be like the doctors, right? And an IHSS provider is your family member or caregiver at the home.
Some people are qualified, correct me if I'm wrong, to be an IHSS provider, and they could work with anyone.
Yes, yeah. I mean, if
maybe you're set up for one person and you want to work with more people, is how would you find more people to work with? Is that the question? Maybe you can clarify.
Possibly, yeah. Maybe you can clarify what you're asking about. If you're, if you're someone who is already a provider and you want to find a recipient, or if you maybe just your social worker hasn't linked the accounts, because that's basically how it works. Is once you have a provider, if the recipient knows who they want as a provider, the person finishes orientation, it's the county that goes in and links your account so that the provider can claim hours for that recipient. That's the most basic way to explain how it works. He said both, I think. Oh.
Medicare recipient into IHSS, so maybe you need to explain the difference between
Medicare. Isn't
Medicare's for seniors usually,
and low income
Medicaid. Wait, Medi-Cal is the California version of Medicaid, and Medicare is the other one. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, if we want to clarify, let's move on. And maybe we'll come back to this one. And once we get some clarification on what we're talking about, Teresa can look it up. Kathy said, SDP program. Can I get paid to be a personal assistant to my son with Harbor Regional Center? Because I lost more than half my hours now with IHSS. My son is 46, mental and stroke, right side. He cannot move. He is a high risk of falling. So the short version is, can she be paid to be the personal assistant for her son on the SDP program?
I want to clarify, the sentences are running together. So I believe you're saying your son is an adult. He's 46 years old.
Sounds, yes.
If he is 46 years old, then a parent could potentially be a personal assistant. For minors, that's not a possibility. But you could potentially, for an adult, you would have to be justifying why you can't do this as the role as a parent and why you would need that reimbursement for that time. Basically, for the most part, it would be I would have to go to work and get a job during those hours. And the only way that I can provide the support for my child is if I don't go to work during those hours. Therefore, this needs to replace what I would be making at work. Yes, it's a possibility. It would be a conversation that's a little less cut and dry as somebody else, but you can absolutely justify, but only for adults. So anyone who's listening, if it's a minor, that's a different story.
Mm-hmm. And from what you said before, if they've just lost IHSS hours, it might be difficult to then get personal assistant hours to replace them because of the questions that Regional Center has when they say, well, if IHSS doesn't see the need for services, then what's different that they're not seeing that we need to?
Correct. So you're still going to have to justify why you need personal assistance to begin with, and prove that. Once you've proved it, whatever you're qualified for, then you're talking about you also are now being the provider and how to justify that. So you can't just say I had, I lost 200 hours of my IHSS a month, so I need Regional Center to pay for 200 hours of personal assistance. It's not quite that simple.
Right.
But as far as whatever your son is qualified for, you then being the personal assistant, as being the fact that he's 46, yes, you could ask to be the provider.
Okay. Really quick. Is that true even if he's conserved, or does that change things? No, I didn't say he was. I'm just saying if that was the case. I don't believe
that it changes things, but I'm not going to say I'm 100% on that. And anything that the Regional Center is saying, ask for them to show you. So if they say, if they were to say he's conserved, so I can't, say, can you show me where it says that? So there's that piece in there. The other thing is Regional Centers do not pay overtime. So that is an important one to remember, is if you have IHSS and you're used to being able to work more than 40 hours a week on your time card and getting paid for that, Regional Center doesn't allow for that. So you could maybe be the personal assistant for your adult child for the 40 hours, but someone else is going to have to do anything else if you get more than 40 hours. So there is not that's just how the program works, and that's how the regulation reads. So you get 40 hours, but you can't have 41.
Got it. Okay. All right. Let's see. Heidi said, since there are going to be changes on how to qualify for Medi-Cal, is this going to affect parents who have a waiver for their child? So Medi-Cal, depending on which kind of Medi-Cal you're on, is going to reintroduce the asset limits at, was it 22,000, something like that, 30,000. So the question was, because that's going to be changing, will that affect parents who have a waiver for their child, like the institutional deeming waiver?
I don't know the specific ins and outs of how Medi-Cal is currently changing. Dakota might know more than that, but about that piece. However, the general rule is when you do your yearly recertification for Medi-Cal, they every single year are going to run you through all their regular programs. So it would affect you in the same way that if you had an increase in or a decrease in your salary of your job, let's say when your child first got on the waiver and got institutionally deemed Medi-Cal, you made a larger sum of money a year and therefore didn't qualify for standard Medi-Cal. Now your child gets to be on institutionally deemed Medi-Cal. But Medi-Cal, the way that it works is you have to be run through every regular program, and you have to not qualify for standard traditional Medi-Cal programs in order to be institutionally deemed. Mm-hmm. So someone may have Medicaid waiver and have the ability to be receiving institutionally deemed Medi-Cal because they have the waiver. But if their income is lower and they qualify for standard Medi-Cal, they're not going to have institutionally deemed Medi-Cal. They're going to have standard Medi-Cal. So when you do your yearly renewal, they're going to do the same thing. They're going to run you through the Medi-Cal programs to see if you qualify for those first, or in this case, your child. And then if your child doesn't qualify for the standard program, then you get back on institutionally deemed Medi-Cal, or you keep it as institutionally deemed Medi-Cal. So if the Medi-Cal programs and qualifications are changing, it could affect you just in the fact that when they go for your next renewal and they run you through the system, if the criteria to be on one of those other programs has changed and now you meet the criteria, then it would just switch over. Yeah, it would just switch over to a traditional Medi-Cal program. The programs are going to run the same, just one has a label that's different. Yeah. It doesn't affect your ability to get IHSS or any of these others. And if later you no longer qualify, as long as you kept your waiver, you can then go back on to institutionally deemed Medi-Cal.
Yeah, realistically, the waiver is for people who already don't qualify for Medi-Cal. Mm-hmm. And the changes that are coming down right now, to put them in the simplest terms, are just limiting the amount of people who qualify. So if you already don't qualify for Medi-Cal, you're and you needed the waiver before, you're probably still going to need the waiver now. So I think it's really not going to change much of anything for people who are already on the waiver. Let's see. Marie had another question. I was told my 18-year-old daughter can qualify as my 7-year-old's respite provider as long as she gets BIS certified. This is so helpful because she is mostly nonverbal, but after me, she knows the needs best. Is that right? If they get, I mean, I think they actually type BLS, but I think, or
I'm not sure what you're referring to as far as the certification goes. It would be slightly dependent on the needs of your child. Typically, you would just need to go through an employee of records. If you're having somebody you know be the respite provider, and they would do fingerprinting and CPR certification and a background check. So those would be the typical items that are on the list, unless your child has extreme behaviors where they needed to have a behavior certified respite provider or an LVN because they have medical needs. So those are the times you would need something different. An 18-year-old can do respite. Most of the time they want them to not live in the home. Occasionally they'll make an exception if you have nobody else that can provide support and you document that individual isn't normally providing support for the child. The reason for that being that respite isn't specific to parents. It's specific to primary caregivers. So the intent of respite is to give the primary caregiver a break. If grandma or aunt is one of the primary caregivers, then the respite's for them too. If sister is one of the ones providing care on a regular basis, then respite's for her too. So she can't be a respite provider if they deem she's one of the people that needs a break. Since the purpose is for the caregiver and the caregiver needing a break, the caregiver can't also be the respite provider, or it defeats the purpose.
Makes sense.
So yes, an 18-year-old sister could be. You're just going to have to justify that they are not the regular primary caregiver for the individual. And yes, they would have to go through a background check, CPR certification, and get hired on with either an employer or an employer of records, which is an employer of records basically means they don't have a boss at a job who oversees them. It's an agency that runs their application through, their background check, makes sure they're CPR certified, and issues time cards and paychecks. So it's just the background work.
All right. Let's see. Tamara said, Is it possible to have have regional fund for an alternate therapy that's not ABA? DIR floor time isn't covered by insurance. Could this be covered by regional under transitional, not SDP?
Under traditional services, which I'm assuming is what you're referring to, alternative therapies are not typically covered. Most of those therapies are considered experimental. ABA has had enough to confirm research behind it that it's no longer considered experimental and therefore can be an option as far as funded services. But anything that's considered experimental, regional centers cannot fund for. Self-determination is different. So SDP does make a difference on the ability to fund for some of those kind of niche services or alternative services.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same reason why basic items like fidgets or sensory objects, toys, sensory swings can be funded under self-determination, but under traditional they cannot because they're all considered experimental. SDP has workarounds on the rules on that traditional doesn't. But from what I know and what I've seen, like I said, there's 21 regional centers and they all interpret some of these gray areas of the law a little different. But as a whole, I'd say no, they very likely would not be funding for that under traditional, where you would have a decent chance in SDP.
All right. Let's try to get some of these a little faster because we're starting to run low on time. I know we gotta make room for the Spanish Live as well. Terry, I don't know if I have the whole question, but we'll read as much as we can. What can be made available if you're a senior age 60 plus and you have to have surgery? What is available from regional center to provide care for your child when you need surgery? Okay, so the caregiver is a senior. Or if you've been diagnosed with a critical illness that occasionally impacts you, chronic fatigue, limited movement, could be a cancer diagnosis or acute arthritis that impacts the caregiver's quality of life, and then, of course, impacts your child. Example of feeding well enough to get your child up, ready for school, and
is the last word that didn't come.
Or what?
Breakfast.
Or breakfast. Okay. So I guess.
Yeah. So most of the time in those situations, those would be considered extenuating circumstances. And that would be where most of the time you would be asking for respite services. Respite doesn't have a maximum cap. So while there's regulations as to every regional center has protocol as to how you can ask for an increase, there's always been, even when there was technically a cap on respite, there's always been exceptions and a rule for exceptions. A major surgery for a caregiver, a cancer diagnosis, any of those would be considered extenuating circumstances where you could ask for a very large increase in respite for a temporary basis while you deal with whatever the situation or medical need is. So that, that could be up to 24 hours a day, depending, but it would be considered for a temporary. If you permanently can no longer take care of your child because of those needs, then you would be having another conversation. But if it's for 3, 6, 9 months due to a medical need, that would usually be covered for a 6-year-old under respite services because you are providing a break for the caregiver who needs an extreme number of hours of a break due to their own health situation, but it's still technically a break for the caregiver.
All right. Hugo said, can we opt out from the union?
I don't know what that's referring to.
Oh, the IHS union.
Okay.
Yes, you can. It's allowed, but we do know that sometimes when you're, and that would be for the providers, right? The provider union. We've heard that when you go to orientation, sometimes people just end up getting signed up for the union without even realizing it. So, yeah, you got to do your due diligence to figure out what it is that you're signing when you go to those things and decide for yourself if that's what you want. All right. Teresa posted a clarification for the difference between Medicare and Medi-Cal, which is Medi-Cal is the California version of Medicaid, and Medicare is for seniors 65 or older, and Medi-Cal is the one you need in order to get IHSS. All right. And then Francisco clarified his question from before. My wife's in IHSS and had a friend who is a Medicare only, not Medi-Cal. Medicare recipient wants an IHSS provider to take care of her. Can an IHSS provider be able to work with a Medicare person? Obviously not through IHSS. Like the recipient would need IHSS hours in order to,
They would have to qualify first before your wife.
right. They have to qualify before the IHSS provider could provide IHSS for them. But if the Medicare recipient has just some other needs that are not related to IHSS, then I don't know what the job qualifications of a caregiver for those things would be and whether or not an IHSS provider would qualify for that. I think there's
it sounds.
I don't know if there's like a very definitive like job of a Medicare provider. I think Medicare is more of a financial benefit than a in-home support program. But I think Teresa's going to look some up stuff about that as well. All right, Teresa's going to post an answer. We'll try to get through these last few questions that we got here. Kathy, this is clarification from earlier. It's for supervision from falling. Anything would help. Okay. Marie said, IHSS question. When I acquired IHSS question. When I acquired to my daughter's pediatrician about IHSS, she suggested that it's risky because they can decide your child be admitted in a group home if deemed necessary. True? Question mark. No. I mean, if the social worker comes to your home and sees like very clear signs of abuse or neglect, yes, they will report that to Child Protective Services. That's like part of their job, I suppose, or that's just part of what they must do as government workers. But no, IHSS does not have any power to determine that your child needs to be in a group home. That's just not what they do at all. That's I've never heard of that before. I'll take this one real quick as well. What about WPCS? And yeah, you mentioned waiting list is crazy. Waiting 2 years now. Yeah, that's the long and short of WPCS is that there are some very exciting things that they can do for you, and we would love to tell you all about it all the time. But the number of people that are on that program is so small, and the number of people they admit onto the program every year is so small that it's barely worth talking about, because yeah, even if you're on like the fast track of the waiting list, like 2 years is considered the low end of how long it takes. So yeah, it's something that we would love to talk about more in the future if they actually start getting people on the program. Murray said BLS CPR certified. So that's like you're talking about for the respite. So everyone who does respite needs to be CPR certified?
They're supposed to be. I believe back in the day, there were a couple agencies that did not require if you were working for an agency. But I believe everyone now has to be. But for employee of records, yes, they have to be CPR certified.
Okay. And here's Teresa's answer about the, I think Francisco's question before. Medicare funds short-term medically necessary home health care, including skilled nursing, physical therapy, and part-time aid assistance, provided you meet strict housebound and doctor certification rules. Does not cover long-term custodial care, 24-hour care, or homemaker. So I don't know if a IHSS provider would necessarily meet the criteria because they're not medically trained professionals to do nursing or physical therapy, but possibly some of that would have meant part-time aid, maybe possibly, but I think it would be limited, and just being an IHSS provider doesn't automatically qualify you for a whole lot of other things. It does make you eligible to do WPCS, but like we were saying, it's very few people who get that, and those people already have IHSS as well. So, okay. We're going to take Hugo's question, and then maybe we can talk about that last thing that we mentioned that we wanted to tell people about as well. All right, Hugo, how many hours can a provider claim working a full-time job also? Assuming this is about IHSS, a provider can work 293 hours per month, which is, I believe, 66 hours a week.
Is it 283?
Did I say 293?
Yeah.
283 hours a month, which is about 66 hours a week. Or I guess, yeah, let's go with that. And which is basically the same amount of time as the maximum that one recipient can get. Now, on rare occasion, you can get an exemption if you have multiple recipients and no other provider possible who can do it, in which case you can get an exemption to go up to 360 hours per month. But nowadays, it's most likely that you can just do the 283. And that's even if you have a full-time job. Obviously, though, if you are working so many hours at your job that you are not present at the home for 283 hours total in a month, then you can't work that many hours because you're not there, right? So, a lot of great questions. Hope that covered everything what people want to talk about. There was one more thing that we didn't get to at the beginning that we kind of wanted to talk about that you had discovered recently that kind of a surprise to you.
Yeah, so we talk about in education, you have the right to record your IEP meetings as long as you give 24-hour written notice. And interestingly enough, I had not learned that you can actually do the same with the regional center. That is not common with regional center, and you may get pushback on that. So it would be important to know where it comes from. But Welfare and Institution Code 4646.6 says the consumer or his or her parent, guardian, conservator, or authorized representative shall notify the regional center of their intent to record a meeting at least 24 hours prior to the meeting. And then later on, it goes on to say that if you notify, the regional center then has the right to record as well. These are audio recordings. So it's basically the same rule that's always been around for education. We did learn you can do that for regional center for IPP meetings as well. So that would be a good one to note if you ever feel like what happens in your IPP meetings isn't well reflected in your IPP written document, or you feel like commitments that are made by the regional center aren't followed through on. Those are kinds of the things that I see more often as complaints from families. So if that's the case, just know that you do have the right to an audio recording. And to be clear, you can never record a meeting without notifying. You can never start your recording until you tell them you're starting. So let's say you sent an email. You still have to, at the beginning of the meeting, saying, just a reminder, I notified you of recording. I'm going to start my recording. So you still have to get verification. This is what I'm doing right now. But those are two very important pieces, but you do have the right for an audio recording of the IPP meeting. So we wanted to make sure you were aware of that.
And can you say again where they can find this rule?
Yeah. So if you Google Welfare and Institution Code, or WIC is what it's abbreviated for, 4646.6. I can have Teresa also post that in the comments there, but that would be the place to find the rule. And if you get any pushback, you can just send that over. I usually just include, if I'm, following a regulation, I'll just put it in parentheses next to my request. So you could just put in parentheses the WIC.
Yep, there it is.
4646.6.
Yeah, so we thought that's good to know because, like you said, for a long time we knew that about the education system that we had to give 24 hours notice. But you said you've gotten pushback from regional centers saying that they did not want to have the IPP meeting recorded. But according to this, you have a right to record so long as you give them that proper advance notice.
Yeah, and I don't think it's rare. It's rarely used, which some of these things, regional centers aren't used to advocates, and they're also not used to recording. So you get more surprise when you have an advocate, for example, show up for a regional center meeting. School systems, recording happens all the time. Advocates show up a lot. So those are more common, but regional center, it's just, it's not common. So I've never been in an IPP meeting through the regional center in 14 years that anyone recorded. So do expect that you may get surprised when you ask, but just knowing where your right comes from will always be helpful. And that's universally with regional center. If you know why you can ask for something or how, that would be helpful.
Okay. Real quick, Teresa said, could an IP recording be useful for IHSS cases? Probably. I mean,
maybe that I would say the difference, which I think we all know. Yes, the IPP document holds weight with IHSS. So I've learned IHSS is not my specialty. I'll leave that to the rest of our agency. Education and regional center is, but there are differences between a school document and the regional center document. The primary one, even though they hold weight with IHSS, but in the recording is the school is talking about what they actually see. Your child is at school when you are not there. So it's now an additional documentation from someone who spends a decent amount of time with your child, who sees them every day and can attest to what they're seeing. With the regional center, they ask you questions and you answer them. And then they write down what you answered. So they're not physically seeing anything. They can't give a personal testimony. They can't share, oh, I noticed your child was, running towards the door, every time before this happened. Whatever that situation is, regional center has no information on what's actually happening beyond what you tell them. So it would hold weight only for the sake of you saying the same thing to the regional center that you're saying to IHSS.
I would agree with that, in that what we sometimes see, and the reason why I think it could be helpful, is not improving what what actually happens. Like you said, the regional center doesn't see these things themselves, but we do sometimes see when judges will say, when something isn't listed in the IPP in great excruciating detail, they'll say, well, you've not been consistently reporting this to all parties involved, so this must be a new thing. This must be something that you just made up. So showing that you have been reporting things consistently and accurately to the school, to regional center, to all agencies involved can be helpful in certain circumstances, or to show that they didn't ask the questions about the specific things the judge thinks that should have been included in the IPP. Because that's what we see. They say the IPP didn't include a narrative about X, Y, or Z. And the answer is either, well, I told them about it, but they didn't think it was necessary to put in the IPP, or they didn't ask about it. And so showing that in the recording could be helpful. Okay, I will briefly touch on this just to tell them what we brought up. Susie asked, is it true that regional center is payer of last resort? Now we have to go, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but yes.
Yes. Oh, and Susie, if you want to call our office and have a consultation scheduled, I'm happy to talk to you more. But I just want one final note is remembering that regional center can only fund for things related to the developmental disability that the regional center serves your child under. So your child might have 10 diagnoses, but if regional center documents say that they have intellectual disability was their qualifying category, then regional centers, even as the payer of last resort, can only fund for things related to that intellectual disability. So if it's related to another condition your child has, they can't fund, even if you've gone through all the proper channels of getting denials. So I would assume that your daughter's rare syndrome would not be what the regional center qualified her under. But there, maybe it is what resulted in that, and we can tie it together a little bit. I'm happy to talk to you if that's the case. So please do call our office, but I do feel.
And we did talk a lot more about the pair of last resort at the beginning of the video. So if you missed that part, you might want to go back and watch it. But yeah, absolutely. Reach out to us if you have more questions, more than we can handle right now in the 1 minute that we have. All right. Thank you so much for being here, Vanea. We have to go and make way for the Spanish live, which are you going to be on with them as well?
I will be on as well.
All right, great. So if you speak Spanish, you can stick around, and
or if you don't, I'll be talking in English too. So
that's true. So it will be a little bit of both. But thank you all for being here. Thank you for your great questions. Thank you, Vanea.
My pleasure.
And we'll be back to our regular lives again next week. So see you all next time.